My name is Renata Shively. I'm 37 years old, and I want to tell you about the afternoon I stood on a sidewalk in downtown Knoxville and watched my husband buy a diamond ring for another woman through a jewelry store window. I want to tell you what I did with my hands. I want to tell you what I did next. I was wearing my mother's watch. It runs 3 minutes fast, and I have never had it adjusted, and I don't plan to. It was 1:09 p.m. by that watch, which means it was actually 1:06, which means I had been standing there for 4 minutes, and I knew it was 4 minutes because I counted. That's the kind of person I am. When I am falling apart on the inside, I count things on the outside. I counted to 240, and I did not move, and I did not make a sound, and I watched my husband sign a receipt for a ring I would never see, for a woman I did not yet know by name, and then I walked to my car and called my best friend Margot. I said, "How soon can you meet me?" She didn't ask me why. That's how you know someone is real. But before I tell you how we got to that sidewalk, before I tell you what I found afterward, and what I did with what I found, and what happened to Darren when I finally moved, I need to take you back to the beginning. Because this story doesn't start at a jewelry store. It starts in a kitchen in Knoxville, Tennessee, when I was 11 years old. And what I learned there about staying quiet is the thing that almost kept me quiet forever. Before I do that, if you're already in this story with me, if something in those first 60 seconds already landed somewhere real for you, hit that like button. Subscribe, because this is only the first part, and you do not want to miss what comes next. And if you know someone who has ever stood somewhere they weren't supposed to be and learned something they can't unknow, share this with them. Now let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up on the east side of Knoxville, in a house that was clean and functional and not particularly warm. My dad, Gerald, was a pipe fitter. He worked long hours and came home quiet in the way that some men come home quiet. Not peaceful, just sealed. My mom, Diane, cleaned houses for wealthier families and then came home and cleaned ours. She never complained. Not once. Not in a way that I ever heard. I had 2 older brothers, both loud, both absolutely certain of themselves in the way that boys in that house were allowed to be certain. I learned early that the way to survive was to be useful and low maintenance and to not take up too much space with whatever I was feeling. There was nothing cruel about my childhood. That's what makes it hard to explain. Nobody hurt me. I just watched, very carefully, how a household worked, who got to have needs, and who got to be the one who managed them. And I made my conclusions, and I got very good at operating from inside them. I was 11 the afternoon I found the Valentine's card. It was in my dad's toolbox in the garage. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for a screwdriver. But there it was, a card, pink envelope, not addressed to my mother. I stood there in the garage for a long time. Then I put the card back exactly where I found it, walked inside, washed my hands at the kitchen sink, and set the table for dinner. My mom was at the stove. She turned and smiled at me. I smiled back. I never told her. I never told anyone. And if you have ever been in a position where you knew something devastating, and your first instinct was to absorb it quietly and keep setting the table. If you've ever been the person everyone called the easy one, the calm one, the one who doesn't make a fuss, not because you were actually fine, but because somewhere along the way you learned that your feelings were the inconvenient ones. I think you already understand everything that comes next. If this is landing close to home, please go ahead and like this video, subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this story, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because what I learned in that garage is what I almost let ruin my life. Now let me keep going. I want to be clear about what I did with the hand I was dealt. I applied to the University of Tennessee on a partial academic scholarship, and I waitressed 4 nights a week to cover the rest. I studied accounting because numbers don't lie to your face. I graduated in 5 years because in my 3rd year my mom got sick and I went part-time for 2 semesters to help cover what she needed. And I did it without telling my brothers how bad it actually was, because they would have worried, and worrying wouldn't have helped the bills. I was 22 when I found my first apartment. I paid my own security deposit. I bought my own bed frame, assembled it alone on a Saturday with a YouTube video and a glass of wine. And I sat on the finished bed in my empty new room, and I felt something I hadn't felt before. Something like permission. Like the space around me was finally the right size for who I actually was. I was 28 when I started at Caldwell and Partners as a junior accountant. By 32, I was senior. By 34, my boss, a careful and exacting man named Ted Caldwell, offered me the controller position, and I turned it down. Darren had said the hours would be too much. I told Ted it just wasn't the right time. He looked at me for a moment in a way that I filed away without understanding why, and said, "The offer stands, whenever you're ready." I met Darren Shively when I was 27. He was 31. He walked into rooms the way certain men walk into rooms, like the room had been waiting for him. He had blue-gray eyes that were warm when he wanted them to be, and for a long time, he wanted them to be warm for me. We got married when I was 28. We bought a house in West Knoxville. We talked about children in the careful way that people talk about things they are putting off until the moment is right. And the moment never became right. And somewhere it stopped being a delay and just became the shape of our life. For the first 4 years, I thought I was happy. Or I thought that what we had was what happiness looked like up close. Comfortable, functional. The two of us moving through our days in a kind of practiced parallel. By year 6, I was sleeping badly. Not dramatically, not crisis level. Just a low-frequency wrongness I couldn't name. Like a radio signal 1 degree off from the station. I notice things. I am very good at noticing things. It's what I do with them that I've had to learn. A receipt I didn't recognize. A shift in how he held his phone. The bathroom door closed when it never used to be. I noticed all of it and I did what I had always done. I absorbed it and kept setting the table. Margot had been asking me quiet questions about Darren for almost a year by the time everything broke open. She never pushed. She knew that if she pushed, I'd go further inside myself. So she just stayed close. She texted me on Tuesdays because she knew Tuesdays were my longest days. She saved me a parking spot at her daughter's school events because she knew I always ran late from the office. She loved me in small logistical ways because she understood that that was how I'd receive it. The Tuesday in October started the same as every other Tuesday. I was at my desk reviewing a quarterly reconciliation. I had a coffee going cold on my right. My mom's watch was on my left wrist, ticking 3 minutes fast. At 12:47 p.m., I got a text from Darren. "Running errands on my lunch. Won't make it home for dinner. Client thing tonight." I put the phone face down. I went back to the report. Then I picked the phone back up and opened our shared bank account. A reflex, just a routine check. And I saw a $40 charge to a parking garage downtown. Darren works from home on Tuesdays. He had no reason to be downtown. I told myself it was nothing. I got my coat, and I drove downtown to see what nothing looked like. I found his car on the second level of the Henley Street garage. Silver Audi, the one he washed every Saturday morning in the driveway while I made coffee. I didn't touch it. I just stood there for a moment in the fluorescent light and the smell of exhaust and concrete, and then I walked out onto the street and started moving. I wasn't panicking. I want to be clear about that. I have learned over the course of my life that panic is a luxury I don't allow myself until I have all the information. So I was operating. I was precise. I walked a 2-block radius because downtown Knoxville on a Tuesday lunch hour has a 2-block radius of places a man in a pressed shirt goes, and I was looking for a pressed shirt. I found him through a window. Marchetti & Sons Fine Jewelry, Gay Street. Floor-to-ceiling glass frontage with warm amber lighting inside. The kind of store that doesn't need to advertise, because the people who need to find it always do. I saw Darren at the display case at the far end of the store. His back was half turned to me. There was a man behind the case, older, gray-haired, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who has done this for decades. He was holding something small on a black velvet tray. I knew what it was before I could see it clearly. I think I knew before I even turned the corner onto Gay Street. I think some part of me has known for a long time. There was a woman beside Darren, cream blouse, camel trousers, blonde hair worn down in loose waves. She was leaning slightly toward the case, and she touched the glass with one finger, not pointing exactly, just connecting, and said something that made Darren nod. The jeweler smiled. He lifted the ring from the tray and held it in the light. Round stone, platinum setting. Even through the glass, from across the street, it caught the light in a way that was impossible to miss. I stood on that sidewalk for 4 minutes and 40 seconds. I know because I counted to 240. I am telling you this not because the number matters, but because I want you to understand the specific discipline it took to stand there and not walk through that door. Every part of me that was Diane's daughter, my mother who put the card back in the toolbox and set the table and said nothing. Every part of me that had spent 37 years learning to absorb and manage and not make a scene. All of it was activated and humming. I watched Darren sign the receipt. I watched the jeweler place the ring in a small box and the box in a bag. I watched Darren and the woman walk out the front door together. They didn't touch immediately. There was a deliberate 6 inches of air between them on the sidewalk. And then they turned south, and Darren put his hand on the small of her back, and they rounded the corner and were gone. I stood there. The light was doing something ordinary and golden, the way October light does in the late afternoon. People walked past me, a man with a coffee, 2 women with lanyards from a nearby office building. Nobody looked at me. Nobody could tell. I pulled out my phone and called Margot. I think about what it means to watch someone use the vocabulary of your life, your kind of Saturday, your kind of store, your kind of gesture, to build something with someone else. To watch the specific tenderness your husband used to have for you get redirected, carefully, deliberately, like water rerouted through a new channel. I wonder if you've ever had a moment like that, where you watched something that was supposed to be yours happen in front of you, and you had to decide in real time whether to feel it or function. Drop that in the comments. I mean it. I read every single one, and I think this is one of those things that more people have felt than have ever said out loud. Margot was there in 40 minutes. She came straight from the clinic. I could tell because she still had her lanyard on, her canvas tote half falling off one shoulder, her dark pixie hair slightly flattened on one side from wearing headphones. She sat down across from me at a coffee shop on Market Street, and she took one look at my face, and she didn't say a word. She just waited. I told her exactly what I saw. No editorializing, no crying. I described the ring and the velvet tray, and the woman's cream blouse, and the hand on the small of the back, in the same voice I used to walk a client through a discrepancy in their quarterly numbers. When I finished, Margot was quiet for 3 full seconds. I counted those 2. Then she said, "Don't go home tonight. Don't confront him yet. Don't let him know you know. Can you do that?" I said yes. She looked at me for a moment with her dark, quick eyes, the eyes of someone who is always reading the room, and she said, "I know you can. That's not actually what I'm worried about." She was worried about the other thing, the thing I always do. She was worried I would absorb this one too. I stayed at Margot's that night. Her husband Philip made pasta and asked no questions, which is one of many reasons Margot was right to marry him. I slept in their guest room under a quilt that smelled like lavender detergent, and I stared at the ceiling, and I thought about Darren coming home to an empty house and texting me, and I thought about what I would say when I answered. And when his text came at 9:47 p.m., "Heading to bed, you okay?" I wrote back, "Fine, long day, sleep well." And I put the phone face down on the nightstand, and I lay there in the dark, and I let myself feel it. Not perform feeling it, actually feel it. The specific grief of being 9 years into a life you thought was real, and finding out the foundation has been hollow for longer than you knew. I did not sleep much, but I did not fall apart either. Over the next 6 days, I did 3 things. The first thing I did was call a contact, a paralegal named Susan who I knew through a professional network, the kind of quiet professional connection you maintain without knowing exactly why. I told her I needed to understand my options, not file anything, not take any action, just understand. She told me that Tennessee is an equitable distribution state. She told me that 9 years of marriage with commingled finances is significant. She told me that a spouse who has been discouraged from career advancement, her word was income suppressed, and when she said it, something shifted very slightly in my chest, has a specific legal standing in a divorce proceeding. She gave me the name of an attorney named Claire Bassett. I wrote it down, and I made an appointment for the following week. The second thing I did was sit down at the kitchen table on 2 consecutive evenings after Darren had gone to sleep, with 3 years of financial records that I had always had access to, but had never looked at with suspicion. I am an accountant. This is what I do. I follow the numbers until they tell me the truth. It took me 2 evenings. I found the secondary savings account first, the one tied to his personal email, with transfers of $800 to $1,100 per month going back 8 months. Then I found the credit card. I accessed it through his email forwarding settings, which he had given me the password to 3 years ago for a travel booking and had never changed, because he had never once considered that I might look. The credit card had a $4,200 charge to Marchetti & Sons fine jewelry, dated 6 days before I stood on Gay Street. And before that, 4 months earlier, a $180 charge to the same store. I understood immediately what the $180 was, a placeholder, something to tide her over while the real thing was being prepared. I sat at that table at 11:30 at night with printed bank statements and a legal pad covered in my handwriting, and I looked at what I had built. 11 months of careful financial preparation for a life that did not include me. Transfers designed to look like nothing if you weren't looking. A credit card statement routed to a work email I was never supposed to see. He had been meticulous. He had been patient. He had underestimated who he married. The third thing I did, and this is the thing that surprised even Margot when I told her, was go back to Marchetti & Sons. I walked in on a Thursday afternoon in the same navy wrap dress I'd worn on Tuesday, because I hadn't thought about what I was doing carefully enough to plan an outfit for it. I was calm. I am always calm on the outside when the inside is doing something that has no name. There was one man behind the counter, older, gray-haired, the same unhurried movements I had watched through the window. His name, on a small engraved plate on the counter, was Franklin Marchetti. 3rd generation, I would learn later. 40 years behind that case. He looked up when I came in with the particular attentiveness of a man who has spent 4 decades reading the emotional weather of people who come through his door. I introduced myself as Darren Shively's wife. Something moved across Franklin Marchetti's face. Not guilt, not recognition exactly, but the specific discomfort of a man who has a very accurate internal instrument and who had already registered, 6 days ago, that something about that sale was not right. I did not ask him for information. I told him something. I told him I managed our joint finances. I told him that if the card used carried our home billing address, I had a legitimate reason to ask about the transaction. I told him I was not angry at him. I set my left hand on the glass counter, my wedding ring visible, my mother's watch catching the amber light of his store. He looked at my hand for a moment. Then he pulled the receipt. The ring was on a card in Darren's name only, but the billing address was our house, our address. The home I had managed and maintained and paid into for 9 years. Franklin told me the amount, $4,200, and he showed me the date. He did not say he was sorry. A man like Franklin Marchetti does not offer pity. He asked, quietly, if there was anything else I needed. I asked for a copy of the receipt. He gave it to me. I thanked him, walked out, got into my car, and sat there for 11 minutes. Then I drove home and made dinner, and when Darren came home at 7 p.m., I put a plate in front of him and asked about his day, and he said it was fine. We watched television for an hour. He fell asleep before me. I lay in the dark beside him, and I held the receipt in my mind like a document, because that is exactly what it was. Evidence. Precise, dated, signed. And I thought about my mother finding that card in the toolbox and putting it back and setting the table and never once moving. I thought about the shape of her life, the specific dimensions of a life lived in careful, loving, total silence. And I thought, not me, not this time, not ever again. I met with Claire Bassett on a Thursday morning, 11 days after I stood on Gay Street. Her office was on the 4th floor of a building on Cumberland Avenue. Clean lines, good light, the kind of office that communicates competence without trying to intimidate. Claire herself was 51, medium height, with reading glasses she wore on top of her head until she needed them, and the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have sat across from a great deal of human pain and learned how to hold it without absorbing it. She shook my hand and gestured to the chair across from her desk and said, "Tell me what's happening." I set the manila folder on her desk. Inside, 3 years of bank statements, the printed credit card records I had accessed through Darren's email forwarding, a log I had typed myself, dates, amounts, account numbers, transfer patterns. Formatted the way I format everything, clean columns, nothing extraneous. The jeweler's receipt from Franklin Marchetti, paper clipped to the top because it was the document that had a face, that told the story in a single line. And a 1-page summary I had written the night before at the kitchen table after Darren went to sleep, because I needed to be able to say it all at once, without my voice doing something I didn't want it to do. Claire opened the folder. She read. She did not make sounds of sympathy or outrage. She just read, turning pages with the efficient attention of someone who knows exactly what she is looking for. After several minutes, she looked up, and she looked at me over the top of her glasses, and she said, "This is unusually well organized." I said, "I'm an accountant." She almost smiled. She said, "I know. I'm going to enjoy working with you." We talked for 2 hours. She explained equitable distribution to me in the specific language of my actual situation, not in generalities, but in the concrete terms of 9 years of marriage, 1 primary earner, 1 income-suppressed spouse, a jointly titled house, and a hidden financial architecture built over 8 months with the clear intention of protecting his assets before a split. That word, suppressed, came up again. Claire used it carefully, clinically, and I made myself sit with it. Twice, Darren had told me the hours would be too much. Twice, I had called Ted Caldwell and declined. Twice, I had made myself smaller to fit a space that Darren had decided was the right size for me. I drove home from that meeting and I sat in the driveway for a few minutes before going inside. The house looked the same as it always looked. Red maple in the front yard just starting to turn. The porch light on because it was always on. 9 years of ordinary Tuesday evenings and Saturday mornings and shared grocery lists, and this is what was underneath it. A man who had been building a door out of our life for almost a year while I balanced the checkbook and declined promotions and made dinner and asked about his day. I called Margot from the driveway. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "I have an attorney." She said, "Good." Then she said, "How are you?" And the specific way she asked it, not as a social reflex, but as a real question, a Margot question, the kind that expects a real answer, made something behind my sternum go tight and then release. I said, "I'm tired, but I know what I'm doing." She said, "That's the most Renata thing you've ever said." I laughed. It surprised me. the laugh. It came out small and real, and I held on to it for a second, because it was the first genuinely light thing I had felt in 11 days. The filing happened 14 days after my meeting with Claire. I spent those 14 days moving through my life exactly as I always had. I made dinner. I asked about his day. I watched television beside him in the evenings, and I slept in the same bed, and I got up in the morning and I went to work, and I sat at my desk and I looked at numbers until they told me the truth, which is the only thing I have ever asked of them. The performance of normalcy was not hard for me. That is a painful thing to admit. The performance of normalcy has been my most practiced skill since I was 11 years old, standing in a garage, holding a pink envelope that wasn't addressed to my mother. On the morning of the filing, I woke up at 5:43 a.m. Darren was still asleep. I lay there in the gray pre-dawn light of the bedroom we had shared for 9 years, and I looked at the ceiling and I took stock of what I was about to do. Not the fear of it, I was past fear. More like the weight of it, the specific gravity of a decision that cannot be unmade. I got up. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the maple in the front yard in the early light, its leaves going red at the edges the way they do every October. Reliable and indifferent, the same tree it was last October and the October before, completely unbothered by what was happening inside the house it stood in front of. My mother's watch was on the counter beside my mug. 5:58 a.m. by the watch, which meant 5:55, 3 minutes fast, keeping its particular imperfect time. I picked it up and put it on. Then I called Ted Caldwell's cell phone. He answered on the third ring, groggy. I said, "Ted, it's Renata. I'm sorry to call early. I want to accept the controller position." A pause. Then his voice changed. The grogginess lifted, and underneath it was something that sounded like satisfaction that had been waiting patiently for a long time. He said, "I'll have HR send the paperwork today." Darren was served at his office on a Wednesday morning, 9 days later. I was in the Caldwell and Partners parking lot when it happened. Not by plan, just timing. My phone lit up on the passenger seat, his name on the screen. I watched it ring once, twice. Then I picked it up. "Renata." His voice was low and careful, already recalculating. "What is this?" Not a question, a probe. Feeling for the edges of what I knew. How much? How far? "It's a divorce filing, Darren. We need to talk about this. You didn't give me a chance to." "The ring is $4,200. I said it quietly. No heat in it. Just the number. Clean and precise. The way I deliver every number. I have the receipt." The silence that followed was unlike any silence I had heard from him before. It was the silence of a man who has built his entire operating system on the assumption that the person across from him is not watching. It was the silence of someone realizing, for the first time, that they have been seen. Not just now, possibly for a long time. "Renata, my attorney will be in touch." I hung up. I sat in the parking lot. The October light was doing the same thing it had done on Gay Street, ordinary and golden, and completely unmoved by the specific devastation of the people moving through it. And right there, sitting in that car with the phone in my lap and my mother's watch on my wrist, something happened that I did not expect. I thought about Darren at 27, the first time I ever saw him, the way the room had seemed to orient around him. I thought about the early years, the real ones, the Saturday mornings before the door between us had closed so quietly we hadn't noticed until it was already shut. I thought about him buying that ring, not the betrayal of it, the sadness of it. A man in his 40s who was so afraid of being ordinary that he had traded his real life for the performance of a beginning. I felt something for him that was not forgiveness and not hatred. It was the specific sorrow you feel for someone who will spend the rest of their life chasing a feeling they could have had, if only they had known how to stay. If that hit you somewhere complicated, if you've ever felt grief for someone who hurt you, not in spite of what they did, but somehow woven into it, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't, because what I'm about to tell you is the part of the story I almost didn't survive emotionally, and I need you still here for it. I did not go back inside the building immediately. I sat in that car for a while longer. I looked at my left hand on the steering wheel. The gold band was still there. I hadn't taken it off yet. I turned it once around my finger, the way I used to do absent-mindedly in meetings, and I thought about the woman in the cream blouse and whether she had opened the box by now, whether she was wearing the ring that Darren had signed a receipt for in a store on Gay Street on a Tuesday afternoon in October, while I was reviewing quarterly reconciliation numbers 3 blocks away. I thought about what it means to be chosen, and then I thought about what it means to choose yourself, which is a different thing entirely, and which I was only just beginning to understand how to do. The proceedings took 7 months. Because of the hidden savings account, 8 months of transfers, documented in my clean columns on my legal pad, and because of the credit card opened without joint knowledge, and because of the 2 emails I had found in Darren's sent folder from 4 and 5 years ago, to me, explicitly discouraging the controller position in terms that Claire Bassett described in her legal brief as demonstrably limiting the earning capacity of the non-initiating spouse. Because of all of it, the settlement was not equal. It was equitable, which in this case meant it leaned toward me. I kept the house, the red maple in the front yard, the kitchen window I stood at on the morning I called Ted Caldwell, the guest room where I had put together a bed frame alone on a Saturday at 22, with a YouTube video and a glass of wine, and felt for the first time like the space around me was the right size. Darren kept the debt, and something else happened, something I had not engineered, had not planned, had not even hoped for, because I had learned by then to stop hoping for things I couldn't control. Lacey Drummond, the woman in the cream blouse, the woman the ring was for, she never received it. Franklin Marchetti's receipt showed the purchase, but in the weeks after I walked into his store, something in Darren had shifted. He stalled. He delayed. He could feel the ground moving under him without knowing why, and when the divorce papers arrived, the ring was still in whatever drawer or pocket or glove compartment he had put it in, and there was nothing left to give. Lacey, who had been waiting for a beginning that kept not arriving, ended things 3 months into the proceedings. I learned this from Margot, who learned it from someone who knew someone, the way news travels in a mid-sized city where everyone eventually knows everything. I was standing at my kitchen sink when she told me. I dried my hands on a dish towel. I stood there for a moment. I did not feel victorious. I felt something quieter than that. Something that had more to do with the specific mercy of endings than with winning anything. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in April. Claire called me at 10:23 a.m. I was at my desk in the controller's office, which still felt slightly unfamiliar in the way that right things sometimes feel before you settle into them. And she said, "It's done, Renata." I said, "Thank you, Claire." She said, "Take care of yourself." I said I would. I hung up and I sat for a moment, looking at the surface of my new desk, which was larger than my old one and had a window that faced east. And I thought about the word done and how it contains both an ending and a permission. I did not cry. I did not celebrate. I went back to the quarterly report I had been reviewing when the phone rang, and I worked until 6 p.m., and then I drove home. That evening, Margot came over. She brought takeout from a Thai place we have been ordering from since we were 26, and she set the containers on the kitchen table and poured 2 glasses of wine, and we sat across from each other in the house I had kept, and we ate, and we talked about everything and nothing, in the particular way that old friendship allows, moving from serious to ordinary and back again, without needing to announce the transitions. Her daughter had a school play coming up. My new role at Caldwell had a learning curve steeper than I'd expected, but I was moving through it. The red maple in the front yard had come back fully green after the winter. At some point, Margot set down her fork and looked at me across the table and said, "How are you actually?" I thought about it for a real moment, not the polished answer, the actual one. I said, I think I'm just starting to find out. She nodded like that was exactly the right answer, like she had been waiting for me to be able to say something that uncertain without flinching. In the weeks after the finalization, I watched what happened to Darren the way you watch weather move across a landscape you used to live in. Not without feeling, but from a distance that lets you see the whole shape of it. He had moved into a corporate apartment by the airport during the proceedings, one of those furnished places that exists in a category between living and waiting. I heard this from Susan, the paralegal, who heard it from a mutual contact. I heard that the apartment had beige walls and a parking lot view. I heard that he had started going to the gym every morning, the way men sometimes do when they are trying to rebuild a self-image from the outside in. I heard all of this without seeking any of it. It arrived the way information arrives in a mid-sized city, through the ordinary circulation of people who know people. I did not feel sorry for him, but I did not feel satisfied by his diminishment either. What I felt was something more like recognition, the particular clarity of seeing someone's choices catch up to them, and understanding that this is simply what happens. Not punishment, just physics. Actions and their consequences moving through time at the pace time allows. There were people who came back. Not many, but some. A woman from my professional network named Gail, who had known Darren slightly through industry circles, sent me a text 3 months after the filing. It said, I heard what happened. For what it's worth, I always thought you were the impressive one in that marriage. I'm sorry it took this to say it. I read that text standing in the Caldwell parking lot after a long Wednesday, and I had to put my phone in my pocket and look at the sky for a moment before I could keep moving. Not because it broke me, because it landed in a place that had been waiting a long time to be seen. Margot, of course, never left. But there was a particular evening, about 6 weeks after the finalization, when she showed me something that mattered more than any of the words that had been said. She came over on a Saturday afternoon and she brought a box. Inside the box were things she had been quietly holding for me for the past 7 months, without telling me she was holding them. A printout of the text exchange from the Tuesday I called her from the street. How soon can you meet me? Saved because, she said, I thought someday you might need to know exactly when you started moving. A photo of the two of us from 11 years ago at a bar in Market Square, both 26, both laughing at something just outside the frame. And a card, handwritten, Margot's fast, slanted handwriting, that said, You were never the easy one. You were just the one who made it look easy. Those are not the same thing. I held that card for a long time. I thought about what it means to be witnessed, not rescued, not pitied, just seen, accurately, by someone who has been paying attention the whole time and chose to keep what they noticed safe until you were ready to receive it. What I did next surprised even me. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had spread 3 years of bank statements across the surface at 11:30 at night, where I had built my clean columns and my legal pad documentation, and I wrote a letter. Not to Darren, not to Lacey, not to anyone who had wronged me or failed me or stood by while something wrong was happening. I wrote it to myself, to the version of me who had stood in a garage at 11 years old, holding a pink envelope and put it back and said nothing. To the version of me who had turned down the controller position twice and told herself it was the practical choice. To the version of me who had stood on Gay Street for 4 minutes and 40 seconds and counted to 240 and not made a sound. I wrote, You were paying attention the whole time. You just hadn't decided yet what to do with what you knew. That's not weakness. That's preparation. The moment you decided, that was the most important moment of your life. Not what happened after. The decision itself. I read it out loud in the empty kitchen. The house was quiet around me. The evening light was coming through the window above the sink, the way it always has in that kitchen, regardless of what was happening inside the house. Indifferent and golden and reliable. Margot was sitting across from me. She had not read the letter. She listened to me read it, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "There she is." Just that. There she is. And something in me that had been held at a particular angle for a very long time, not broken, just braced, always slightly braced against the next thing, came down. Not with drama, just a quiet internal release, like a breath you have been holding so long you forgot it wasn't your natural state. The controller position became natural in the way that right things do, gradually and then completely. Ted Caldwell stopped treating it as new and started treating it as simply how things were, which is the best professional compliment I have ever received. I hired a junior accountant in the fall, a young woman named Priya, 24, sharp and slightly uncertain of herself in the way that competent young women often are when they haven't yet been told enough times that their instincts are good. I told her on her third day that her instincts were good. She looked at me like I had said something unusual. I thought, I know. Someone should have told me sooner, too. On a Saturday morning in May, 7 months after a Tuesday in October, I woke up without an alarm at 7:12 a.m. The light in the bedroom was the particular clear light of a Tennessee spring morning. Not dramatic, just clean and steady and full of the promise of an ordinary day. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the front yard. The red maple was fully leafed, deeply green, completely itself. My mother's watch was on the counter beside my coffee mug. I had taken it off the night before and set it there and forgotten to put it back on, and now I was just looking at it in the morning light. This small gold thing that ran 3 minutes fast, that had been on Diane's wrist and then on mine, that had been ticking on Gay Street and in Claire Bassett's office and in the Caldwell parking lot when I told Darren my attorney would be in touch. Keeping its imperfect time through all of it, never once stopping. I thought about my mother, not with grief exactly. The grief had its own shape and I had made room for it long ago. More with something like conversation. The internal kind, the kind that doesn't need words because the other person isn't there to receive them, but the thinking of them is its own form of contact. I thought, I found the card, Mom, and I didn't put it back. I thought about what her life might have looked like if someone had handed her the language for what she was living inside. If someone had sat across from her, the way Claire sat across from me, and said the word suppressed, and meant it clinically, accurately, as a descriptor of a condition that had a remedy. I thought about all the women who absorbed things quietly and set tables and said nothing and called it love, because nobody had ever shown them the difference between love and self-erasure. I picked up the watch. I put it on. It settled on my wrist the way it always does. Slightly loose, a little heavy, exactly right. My name is Renata Shively. I'm 37 years old, and I am finally, for the first time in my life, exactly where I decided to be. Not where I ended up, not where circumstances left me, where I decided. That difference between landing somewhere and choosing somewhere is the whole story. It is the only story, really. Everything else is just what happened along the way. Before you go, I want to ask you something. And I mean this genuinely, not as a way to close a video, but as something I have been sitting with, and I think you might have been sitting with too. Has someone in your life ever used your steadiness against you? Ever looked at the fact that you don't fall apart and decided that meant you didn't need anything? And if so, what was the moment you stopped letting that be the whole story of who you are? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one, and I think the answers to that question are some of the most important things people never say out loud. If this story stayed with you, if something in Renata's Tuesday afternoon, or her kitchen table, or her mother's watch found something in you, like this video, Subscribe so you're here for the next one. And share it with someone who has been the calm one, the easy one, the one who always manages. Someone who might need to hear that those words are not the same as being fine. I'll see you in the next story.